My name is Dr. Ahmed Al-Sayyad. I would just like to raise a point and ask a question. Post the Arab Spring, the cycles of business, let's say, has changed. We've got a lot of elections in government posts. We've got elections for university presidents. We've got elections even for university deans. And we've got businesses that used to be, you can finish a deal and conclude a deal with the number one person, number 2, 3, 4, whatever. Now you need to build bottom up. You can't, no one will dare finish a business or conclude a project or something top down anymore in at least the key countries of the Arab Spring. So in my opinion, there will be a lot of retraining of people to do business, of leadership, at education, at industry, at government, and even at multinational companies who have been doing business the old way for the past 30, 40 years themselves. So it's not only about educating the populations, it's about educating the people who are dealing with them from the international community. So having all these people involved, what collaborative initiatives can emerge from this perspective that will join these various stakeholders, if any? Thank you.
Or also collaborative models, which seem to work. Why don't we come across the panel for comment? Wayne, an observation?
Sure. And it's a great question. Now, in the same way to the last point, which was how do people stay connected with the new generation, whether it's technology? And, you know, one of my observations over time is it's simply not optional any longer. You know, to be connected with people, you need to be incredibly contemporary in your use of technology and media. And I even put myself in that category, and I use things like Twitter not because I want to or because I like it, because I feel compelled to do it, to at least attempt to stay in touch. And so if you're in academia or if you're in business, if you select not to use these channels, then you simply lose touch and you can't perform, you can't be effective. And I think that's incredibly important as we look towards leaders of tomorrow, is to understand that these things are simply not optional, that that pace of change is so incredibly fast that you have to stay with it. But then as we think about collaboration, to the same point, if we think around how leaders need to stay in touch with employees of tomorrow, think around the relationship between business and education and that collaboration. And, you know, as a millennial said to me recently, look, you talk a lot about work-life balance. Why do you do that? There's work and there's life and they're the same thing. And I don't think that way. But I think we need to think about the connection between business and education the same. It is that how do we bridge that gap? Back to the point on parents, you know, parents instill values and beliefs that really equip people for the future. And when you look at the employees of tomorrow, they no longer want to work for a corporation or a logo. They want to work for a person that inspires, that engages, that motivates. And you know, in the olden days, we used to choose to work for a company that had a CEO that was inspirational. But today, employees want to work for a boss that's inspirational, you know, that really drives a passion, a belief, and a purpose. And so, you know, when we think about technology, you know, I thought I was pretty smart recently when we were interviewing people and I would Google them and I check them on LinkedIn. Believe you me, they do that far more to us than we realize. And so that transparency is bigger than ever. And so, you know, leadership, visibility, personally, professionally. You know, I found a website recently called Glassdoor.com. I'd never heard about it. But that's where anonymously people go in and rate you as a leader. And so there's nowhere to hide, you know. And so we have to really be prepared for that as we look to the future. Even if it makes us uncomfortable, it's simply not optional.
I think that's a very fundamental point. There is nowhere to hide, especially in the digital age. Josephine.
To answer directly your question, if it's any use, and sharing some of my experiences, and particularly in Philips, I think first of all, you know, what you said, it reminds me a little bit of the saying, this is the worst of times and this is the best of times. The worst of times is things are collapsing, the best of times because we can reinvent and maybe go towards a kind of society and way of living that we want. So it would sound to me in this that you have to do, that the first thing is you really have to have some kind of glue, and the glue really comes from a vision. And that vision, I think, has to be done collectively amongst these people who have now got to learn to train, to skill, and to work together. So there's got to be a vision somewhere. Whether somebody is clever enough to come up with a vision, or even better, that the vision is an engagement by which then everybody buys into it. And then the second thing I would say is you have an opportunity now to really start to develop the new skills that are needed. We've talked a lot about what doesn't work. And here's an example. In Philips, we were doing a lot on health. When you're thinking of actually innovating in health, that's a stakeholder business. You can't have two people in a lab inventing a new health delivery system, because you've got to have the patient who's often at home, the carer, the loved ones, the physician, the internet expert patient groups. It's a whole ecosystem. And this is really what we're going to be doing in the future. Innovation is going to be in reinventing many of the challenges we're facing in health, education. These are the big social issues, not products, but the social issues. And there you need different skills. You need to be able to work across functions. You need to be able to work multidisciplinary teams, so the scientist can talk to the social scientist, who can talk to the strategist, who can talk to the marketer. You need to have the skills of people who can identify who the stakeholders are and bring them together and facilitate these people to draw out their insights as you try to innovate. You need a lot of communicative and emotional skills. So I think when you have such a thing to build up from the bottom, tabula rasa, build the vision collectively, think of the skills you need, and then drive home that possibility to achieve those skills, and you're ready for the future.
Alan, thank you. Once again, maybe just a question from my side, or even maybe a challenge and a statement to what Josephine had made earlier, and that is people don't want to be led anymore. I don't think that is true. I think people are looking at leadership, but they're looking for a different kind of leadership. There I want to link up again with what Wayne has said. The modern person doesn't want to work for a particular business. He or she wants to work for a particular person, a leader. And that tells us that leadership, and I think the Arab Spring and the British summer and everything has told us that leadership now has to be focused more than ever before on the fact that we must lead people. It's about people, and it's about the relationships between people, and it's about opportunities for other people, not for the leader, for the followers.
I want to take the challenge. May I just take the challenge? Because I heard somebody here as well say, I agree. I've taken the challenge. I agree and I don't agree. I agree that I don't think eventually people do want to be led, but I think there's a transitional phase. I think we are still not confident enough to self-organize. We don't know how to, but we will get there. So I think in the meantime, we need transformation transitional leaders who have strong purpose and vision and who are the facilitators, enablers. But I would bet you, anybody willing to take this bet? I would bet you that in 30 years' time, when we really have gone to a collaborative, networked, self-organizing system, that there forms of maybe transitory leadership for a certain moment, for a certain skill, you will have a leader. It will then transform. It will be a much more fluid concept than the leader. So I think ultimately you will find with the democratization of society, our concepts of leadership and the desire to be led will become less.
A question here in the front row, and then there was a question way in the back. If you wave your hand again, the microphone will start migrating, please. So we'll go here, we'll go to the back, we'll go to the vigorously waving hand over there. Please.
Thank you. My question...
You're from where?
Oh, I'm Mondo Kagonyera, Chancellor Makerere University in Uganda. My question goes to any of them.
Please.
It's two-pronged. One, in leadership, you have to differentiate between political leadership and business leadership. In business, the yardstick for success is very clear and I think simple. and therefore you can easily decide what sort of leadership you want. But I'm talking about political leadership and this monster called power. When someone has power, how do you expect them to approach this, developing new approaches to leadership? The second one is, one of the most influential agents for change these days is the media. Does the media, the world media, have the same purpose as we have in this room or not? And if we don't, what can be done about it?
Well, good questions. Maybe we'll start with Wayne, then Paul.
Sure, and maybe I'll take the first part and maybe one of the others take the second. But look, it's a great question around power, which to your point is traditional. It's how people were brought up and what they aspire, and it means success. Influence is way more important today. To drive change and to have a compelling drive to do the right thing, whatever that is, without thinking around what does it mean for me, what does it mean for my job, my authority, my salary. And so we're seeing a huge switch in values in that respect as we think around leaders that actually influence without having direct accountability or direct control, which really lends itself very closely to the collaborative approach that Josephine talked around. And so leaders that have a far broader perspective than, looking selfishly at their own area. And so, to your point, well, what if you have leaders like that? I think, quite honestly, they need to get with the program pretty quickly. And we're even seeing that in business nowadays, that leaders that think that way, quite frankly, are out of date and out of touch. And because that impacts their decision-making, because first and foremost, they're thinking about themselves. And that's not in the interest of the employees, and that's not in the interest of business. And so, that cultural shift in how we measure leaders based on the impact of what they do, regardless of what's their direct accountability, becomes really, really important for companies nowadays.
I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at I think it's the Webster Dictionary's definition of success. It's the accumulation of power, wealth, and status. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because what we have to be working on, in fact, is some of that. So in our hierarchical structures, and I'm a macro historian. We got a lot from these structures. There's no way that you can look back and say it was wrong. I'm just saying it made sense. It doesn't make sense anymore. But it gave us many things. It gave us the welfare state. Well, we're trying to hang on to it at the moment. It gave us free education. It gave many things. But it was once relevant. It's increasingly irrelevant. But in that structure, success was the accumulation of wealth, power, and status. So anybody who's bright goes for success, goes for wealth, power, and status. And I did some workshops with a group of people. And we decided to start to play and reinvent what we would want success to be in the future. Because actually, these are all constructs. God did not say success is wealth, power, and status. In fact, he'd probably say quite the reverse. So these are mutable concepts. So we played around in these workshops, going from success. And one woman said, well, success is a good social outcome in which all the participants have contributed. I rest my case.
But let me just throw one onto that, I think we have to be careful attempting to define success, because success is very personal. And so my interpretation of success is probably very different to yours or Paul's or Alan's. And so as we think about leadership propositions and how companies differentiate themselves, it's very easy to fall into the trap of assuming what success looks like to you, and because it's so personal. And back to your point, power, money, etc. I'm pretty sure as you talk to the youngsters of today, that's not important to them.
That is true, but if you think of our leaders at the moment, we have a problem in Britain that actually, in the last 30 years, I think business was good up to 30 years ago. Then we had a thing called financial capitalism, and the world went berserk. And what's happened there now, and this is not me, this is The Guardian, talking about our leaders as the feral elite. It's that group of people at the top of corporate, of banks, of media, that have and are accumulating vast amount of wealth and power. And that's our problem. Whether we don't want to define success, they are still pursuing the classical definition of success, and it's causing us a lot of problems because they are going exactly for that. Prestige, shed loads of money and power. And so I'm afraid in that respect, you know, we have a problem, Houston.
I agree. But sorry, just to answer it one more time, is one of the new traits that we're seeing in people, and think about successful companies, think about Steve Jobs, think about all these, they take risks, whether it's a technology risk, you know, investing capital in a product, you know, whether it's a blockbuster drug, for example. And so one of the challenges that business have is to become comfortable with a certain amount of risk, especially as you look at the growth regions. I mean, you know, somebody made the example about Turkey. In my region, Turkey is the most stable country, which is incredible. But, you know, you think about Libya, you think about Iraq, you think about all these countries where we're trying to develop a people vision, and the truth is, we don't know what's going to happen next week. Now, the leaders that evolve in those countries are so agile and so nimble and so able to respond. You know, if you compare that to the US, where we've traditionally grown leaders, there is not a whole lot of political evolution. There's not a huge need to respond quickly to political change. You know, you look at Egypt, a country that, quite frankly, is going to be lacking leadership for a little while. So how do companies, how does education think about that? You know, how do we begin to think about that? So as we look towards leaders in growing economies and emerging markets, we really have to, as companies, become much more comfortable with risk, because in general, companies dislike risk. You know, we commit to a quarter, we need to make that number, we don't want risk. But risk is what will actually drive a premium and enable companies to grow markets and grow talent. And so we have to be comfortable with a certain amount of risk in the portfolio, and that's a real challenge for companies.
How would it work in South Africa? How would it work in a parents' council when you introduce the notion of risk?
Well, we have to deal with risk. Let me just deal with two other issues before I get to the issue of risk. And that is, first of all, I don't think we should distinguish between business leadership and political leadership. And I think that's exactly the point the thing that Nelson Mandela taught us, that his legacy is that leadership is not about power. It's not about success in terms of numbers and figures, etc., etc., etc. And I think the second important point I'd like to make is that Webster might have to rethink their definition after the developments of the last 12 months, the political developments and the economic developments, the revolt in the major cities against financial institutions and financial leaders, the big corporates. So I think we may see a new definition of success or of leadership in the very near future. As far as risk is concerned, risk forms a fundamental part of the function that a governing body and the parents must consider. And we're talking the whole range of issues that may be exposed to risk, from health to finances, from educational outcomes, health issues, safety issues, all of those.
Now let me take a question from the very patient person in the back, and then we'll come. The role of the media. Let's save it for the wrap-up comments and keep it going this way. The question was, I believe, way in the back, and you have the microphone.
Yeah, hi. I'm Sarah Misnet from Georgetown University, just here across the campus. And my question today is that from a youth perspective, we have trouble understanding why leaders of today don't want to collaborate with us. It's as if our ideas aren't polished enough to be implemented on the grand scale and on the bigger scope. So you're talking about radical change and how radical change comes around. And I think it comes because people in the youth don't believe that their ideas are being integrated into society in the correct way. We have our ideas, we just don't have the platform to share them. And that's why you see youth very active on media platforms such as Twitter and Facebook. And you talk about those starting revolutions. They start revolutions because we don't feel that we have the proper outlet in society that has been, you know, established correctly for us to interact in a way with the greater community. And I believe that that's where the legitimate leadership will come from.
I agree.
Is it a fair charge? We don't listen and we don't collaborate.
It's fair. And we've seen in the recent developments over the past 12 months, I think the youth have taken the lead in challenging us as the older people because we haven't been listening.
But I think it's fear. I go down, I can't remember who said this, but, I think what's happened is we're in that unique historical moment where so much is changing and the youth has made the evolutionary leap. And the present leaders haven't. They are the change. And they've made that evolutionary leap. They've moved in, enabled by the digital technologies, but they've got the concept that more is more. More people doing more equals more. You add one person to the web and it's exponential. This whole thing is, in fact, the evolutionary leap we need, because if we continue to think of scarcity and we don't release those energies that you have, enabling us to have more, and therefore moving to abundance, we're not going to survive. The planet will and we won't. So they've made the evolutionary leap. We kind of understand it, but we don't have it in our gut, and we're scared. It's
when I talk
a
to Wayne, I don't get that. I don't sense that you're the kind of leader that wouldn't talk to a Georgetown grad and listen to them and encourage them. Is it a fair charge?
Completely fair. And bear in mind, whilst I try and be a millennial, I'm very much a Gen X with millennial ambition. Because look, I mean, in a big corporation, Josephine hit it, right? Leaders are scared. They don't know how to communicate. And so back to your point, it's literally an alien concept to them because it's the speed. I mean, if you think, I certainly remember when I was growing up in business, you simply didn't connect to the CEO of a company. You didn't. I mean, there was a matrix and a chain of command. Today, and I'm pretty sure you would say this as a student today, if you want to know something about my company, then just email the CEO, right? Drop him an email, and you know what? He should reply within a day too. And that is such a different way of thinking to the generation that we grew up in. And if you look at our company, we've probably got 30,000 leaders that grew up in a different generation. And so, the challenge for us, certainly for me in a human resources role, is how on earth do we equip leaders to be able to do this? Because it's incredibly different. It takes them out of their comfort zone. And they, in some cases, they don't want to do it. And so we really have to think now about developing a leadership generation of tomorrow that's equipped to connect with people and equipped for the pace of change.
Now, we have some questions on Twitter. One is really terrific for us to wrap up, so I'm going to save that and take a question here. The lady in the red jacket, and then the lady in the second row. Then we'll go over here, and then fairly soon we'll be coming to a wrap-up, and I asked each panelist to think of what are the takeaways they'd like to take from this debate to make them better leaders.